So my name is Beth Ellen Nash. I am the founder of Wings to Soar Online Academy. I am also the intervention and individualization specialist for Wings to Soar, so I help create the custom learning plans that wrap around each child. So this is 4 mistakes that may be sabotaging your child's academic progress. I spoke at 8 different conventions this past spring and talked to hundreds of families, and it really came to my attention that there were some common themes that were carrying through on what might be getting in the way of your kids' academic progress. I thought, I should probably put together a presentation on this and actually share these insights with people because there was some common themes that kept coming forward. The first mistake is it relies too much on mom, or perhaps, Jeff, if you're the one who's the homeschooler, dad. So apologize if I'm stereotyping with the too much mom. When what you're doing in your homeschool is relying too much on the homeschooling parent, you're stressed out, you never feel like you have enough time, you're constantly spread too thin, probably can't meet all the needs of all your kids. And when what you're doing is relying way too much on mom, we don't foster the independence that we really want to foster in our kids. So many families I hear over and over, especially when their kids are struggling, when they have a struggling learner, that they say, my kid just needs so much of my time, there's just not enough me to go around. I want to help them. It's not that I don't want to, but I need to help my other kids too, especially if they're in that 10 to 12 range where I think, Jeff, you mentioned that your student was, that they're really just starting to itch for that extra independence. If they're struggling, they really have difficulty with that. That's something that some of our programs help to address because they're computer-based and take a little bit of that pressure off of mom or dad, allow the student to gain a little bit more independence. So mistake number 2 is that we tend to be too lax in our homeschooling. Now, I'm not trying to say this as a cut on anybody or a dig or anything like that, but something I frequently hear is that families say, oh, it's just so hard, so we just don't do much of that. Maybe it's reading, maybe it's writing, maybe it's math. One of the mistakes we make is we back away because it's feeling just too hard for the student. I know Grace's mom, Paula, said she would cry when we tried to read. Every time it's too hard, Mom. And they would just back off and maybe do really informal reading, and not do anything more focused to actually target the reading skills. And she said, and I let that go on for just too long because we'd back away because it was just too hard. I had another family who they came to me when their daughter was in 10th grade. She's severely dyslexic, and she was reading at about a mid-3rd grade reading level at that point. And I had asked them, so what are you currently doing for your English? And they told me, Easy Grammar. Now, there's nothing wrong with Easy Grammar. Easy Grammar is a good program. And I said, well, what else are you doing? And they said, well, really, reading's just so hard, we just don't do it. I ended up backing her down to the 3.5 grade level where she was, and we backed down as far as she needed to go, and then bumped up the time and intensity at that just right level, and we started seeing some good progress. We started seeing some good gains. With Grace's situation, they started in October with me. Grace was 12. She just turned 12. You may have seen the interview in March, so it was like just a little less than 6 months. She said Grace loves the programs. She says, Mom, get off the computer. I need to do my Lexia, or her other programs. The fact that we were starting her where she was, we were skipping past the things that she already knew, because she tested out of those and she didn't have to waste her time because she hated doing things that she already knew. But of course, Mom's going back and trying to fill in the gaps and not sure where those gaps are. So she just go back to the beginning and try to check off all the boxes again. When we back down to that level, and we bumped up the time intensity, she was now working on these skills 40 to 60 minutes a day. We started to see some substantial gains. I didn't get to hear about it until 6 months later, but Mom, I could see the gains in her progress reports. But when I got to talk to Mom and had this little mini interview with Paula, she said, we never had a bedtime reading habit or anything like that because reading was just so hard. And it was just too much of a pain, and it wasn't, it was like, it just a source of struggle, not a source of pleasure. But as Grace started working in the programs and started gaining a little more confidence in her skills and could start seeing herself as a successful reader, she started reading her chapter books at night. And so, sure, her little chapter books. They were little 2-page chapters, mind you, back at the 3rd grade level where we started. But her mom said her level started increasing, and she was reading harder and harder books. So now she's reading 10-page chapters. I'm sometimes having to tell her to turn out the light because she wants to just keep reading. So she's 12, and Mom, she just finished up the 5th grade level materials earlier this summer. So she's reading, and the exciting thing is it's transferring over. So that backing down at the just targeted level is really making a huge difference for Grace, and I know it has for many of our other students as well. Another aspect that 2 lack mistake is, well, 1, not having a plan. So we're kind of just go by the seat of our pants and just flow with it. Now, most of us have at least some form of a plan, and we have an intention. The stronger we set the intention of why we're doing what we're doing and actually make a plan, and know, why am I using this particular component in my curriculum? Why am I doing this particular activity? I give the example, and I did this years ago, where we were studying Rome, and we made a pretty cool Roman aqueduct. That was our little project. Now, I had set it up that this was our art project that was paralleling our history studies. So the fact that we were just kind of having fun with it, we were making, it was a hands-on crafty project, as opposed to, I wasn't trying to claim this was my history at this point. I was focusing on this as that this was an art project along the side. Now, if I was trying to say, yeah, we spent 2 weeks on that and we were doing history, I could have made it a rich integrated unit and really brought in why we needed aqueducts. Why were there 10 different aqueducts coming into Rome? What was it like having city? I mean, most of our kids know what a city is like. This was the first time there was a large concentration of people together needing that water. We could have built in ratios and proportion work, and we could have learned about the engineering of how it was built, and learned about that many of the soldiers who signed up to be in the army actually ended up doing an awful lot of road construction and aqueduct construction, other things like that. We could have woven all that in and made it a rich unit. I was choosing to use the aqueduct as a fun hands-on project, and there's nothing in that, and that is great. As long as we're honest with ourselves about what it is, why we're doing what we're doing. Another example I often will use is baking cookies. I have heard many people say, well, yes, we bake cookies to practice our math skills. And that's fine for the first 3, 4, or 5 times. But how many times do we need to measure half cups and quarter cups and third of cups, which is in reality what you really do in cooking, in baking, before it's not really a math lesson anymore? There's nothing wrong with baking cookies and enjoying time together. In fact, it's a wonderful thing. What you need is a break together to have a nice bond together and have an enjoyable time and a little stress relief and just make some cookies together. Go for it. Just don't tell yourself that you're actually doing math when you're not. So be intentional about what your plan is and why you're doing what you're doing is huge. That also carries over into things like when I'm doing a written assignment, especially for a struggling learner, but for anybody, what is the purpose of the assignment? If I'm asking the student to write a summary of what we just learned in history, I want to focus on my feedback entirely on their summary skills. Did they pick the main idea? Did they choose a few key supporting points? Especially if we've got struggling learners, we do not want to focus on correcting spelling and handwriting and grammar and capitalization, punctuation at that point. If something's worth taking to a final draft, by all means do that. But if what you're focusing on is the summary writing, focus on that for your feedback. They have so many things we could correct, but we don't want to discourage them. We want to focus on what it is we're doing. I guess that part is not exactly too lax, but it goes along with that. Be intentional. Schedule their harder activities when they're most alert. Now, I've often heard people say, oh, schedule the math first thing in the morning when they're most alert. Well, for me, I'm not a morning person. So scheduling first thing in the morning, not a good plan if you want me to be scheduling when it's I'm most alert. So for me, if you're trying to schedule when I'm most alert, you're going to want to choose a late morning kind of time slot or an evening time slot for me, maybe a mid-afternoon. First thing in the morning, you may notice on my scheduling calendar if you want to book a free consultation that my consultations don't start until 10 o'clock because you don't want to talk to me before then because I'm not in my best form. I'm not going to be able to be as present with you. So I don't schedule client appointments before 10 because I don't want to give you what's not my best. So schedule when your child's most alert. Now, if you've got several kids, make sure you think about who needs my attention most intensively at any given time. Can I spread this out during the day at all? How can I, maybe both kids need a computer. Well, right now this is an activity, it's a bookwork activity for one student and it's a computer activity for another student. This one's one that Susie needs a lot of help with, but Johnny can be pretty independent with this other subject at this point. That's one of the things that having some of the online programs that we do can help with, is help spread out a little bit so there's not all quite so needing you. Do plan for frequent breaks throughout the day. So that's not being lax when you plan for breaks. Plan for breaks. Don't just take them and take indefinite length breaks. Take planned small breaks. I would much rather have a student take a 10-minute break after 20 minutes of work and do that throughout the day than try to push through, and hit a wall. It's really important. I don't know how many of you in your homeschooling have tears in your world, but it is very common when I'm doing a talk in a large room, when I ask, so how many of you are there tears in your homeschool sometime during the week? And a huge proportion of the hands go up. And then I always ask, include mom in that. And when you include mom in that, then we have even more of the hands go up. So it's important. That wall often comes where they hit a wall, they get to the tears, they get to shutdown mode. It's really important to notice what their signals are. For some kids, it's sometime between 18 and 20 minutes. If we're working on math, we're shutting down. If you know that and can kind of start reading that pattern, you're going to be much more productive to stop at 15, 16, 17 minutes before we get to that shutdown point. Take an intentional 5 or 10 minute break and then come back. Then you are to push through, and the tendency is to try to get one more good minute. One more good minute, because we know the tears are going to come, or the wall, we're going to hit the wall. But if we always push until we get to the wall, inevitably the wall is there, and we get those tears, and the frustration, and the meltdowns. But if we recognize what the signs are, either the body language symbols that the student's giving us, or that, hey, it's really, if I'm paying attention, it's about this point in the lesson, we stop before we hit the wall, take an intentional break. Because we all know that once we get to those tears, once we get to that meltdown, that you're going to spend at least 10 minutes getting the meltdown and the tears calmed down before we can even begin to think about resuming. And then we haven't had a good break in there. We've just had a bad break. So if you build in the breaks and stop before you hit the wall, not saying stop and don't come back to it, but stop, take an intentional break, we have a much better chance of actually achieving what we're trying to achieve. Another way that we can be too lax, so the first one that I mentioned in the previous slide of the too lax was we back away because it's hard, instead of backing down to where they need to go. Sometimes we don't have a plan. We aren't scheduling intentionally. Sometimes when they hit that wall and they're in tears, we just say, I give up. I can't do this anymore. And so we backing away again. So we back away from it because we hit the wall, we got to the tears. If you take intentional, frequent breaks built in when the student needs it before they get to that shutdown point, we aren't going to slip into this twist, oh, we're backing away because we're just in meltdown and it's the day's shot. So the more you can do that, the more we can be very intentional about using our time. And I think a lot of our kids, 20 minutes on, 10 minutes off, we'd get far more done than if we tried to just keep pushing. Another aspect of too lax that's a big mistake, so I gave you the two lax, and I'll tell you the other twos in a minute, but I had a few points I wanted to bring out in each of these that I think fit. One is sometimes we have so many great activities that we want them to be involved. There's so many wonderful opportunities that we overschedule and have too many things we're doing that it keeps us from working the plan. So whatever the plan is we intend to do, maybe we know we need to get 5 days a week in on 2 different reading pieces we're doing. Then we have co-op group and scouts and PE and all sorts of other things, and then we just never quite get to it. Maybe, it only happens 3 days a week. Our plan for how we're going to get a child caught up and how we're going to help them make the progress they need to make is to tackle it 20-minute chunks of the reading or intervention we're choosing 5 days a week, and we only end up doing that like 3 days a week. We're only getting 60% of the time in we intended to. I know one of my students, he sometimes jokes, yeah, for being, homeschooled, we're not home very often. Joining class, he's one of my high school group class kids, and he's frequently in the background. The one it's not his bedroom that I'm seeing in the background. It's like, so where are you today? And he's, getting on the Wi-Fi wherever he is, and that's okay. But I knew he was feeling a little pulled this year. Conversation about trying to maybe not quite schedule quite so many activities, academics a little more, so he's not quite so pulled. And if you're doing an intervention program, it's all to work with, whatever the protocol is, whatever the plan is. Like when I set up with families and we're going to set up a plan, we're going to work, I often set up with families that we're going to do, I'm just going to use reading as an example because it's the most common struggle area that I encounter. We're going to do maybe 20 minutes in Lexia, and then we're going to do 20 minutes that's going to be either Head Sprouts or Raz Kids. And then we're going to end up with some reward game time, which is actually 20 minutes in another program called Nessie that's a fun practice program for the reading practice. But they can feel like it's a reward. So we're kind of planning for about an hour total. I know when my families do this consistently, 5 days a week preferred, at least 4, but preferably 5, we get gains. 1.5 to 2 years gains are not at all uncommon. In fact, very common. I have had a few families who've had like 2.5 year, 3-year type gains that we've seen when they follow the protocol and work the plan. But the people who don't follow the protocol, whatever we ask them to do, they're the ones who things aren't working. And they're wondering why it's not working. And they say, well, it just didn't work for us. One of my teachers will actually be seeing what's going on and say, hey, not seeing the student working in this very consistently. Okay, so let's get back to the plan we said so that we actually can be getting the gains that you're wanting to see. So what are you wanting to see? Well, we need to make a plan to do that, and we need to follow it. So whatever, if you're going to choose an intervention, if you're going to use Fast Forward, if you're going to do CogMed, working memory training, if you're going to do, let's say you're going to work with Barton, you're going to work with Barton, you're going to do a Lindenwood Bell program, you're going to, whatever it is. I mean, the CogMed working memory training and the Fast Forward are 2 of the things we use. But whatever it is you're going to use, if you follow the protocol, most people get results. If you don't follow the protocol, you don't do what the plan is, you don't get the results you're looking for. Okay, so the third mistake is waiting until it's too late. Now, kind of a misnomer because there really isn't a too late. You can pretty much always intervene. You can pretty much always help them turn things around. I would say the vast majority of people who I talk to at a booth at a homeschool convention have kids between 10 and 13, maybe 9 and 13. They've tried a number of other things, and whatever it is just not working, and now they're really like, help. I really need to do something about this. Early intervention is the best. I think, Liz, maybe your student was the 6 to 9 range. The earlier you can start, the better, because we can just deal with the academic issues, the struggle, rather than the learning struggle, rather than having emotional struggle laden on top of that. That we now have self-esteem issues, and we've got a sense of shame that innately I'm not okay. There must be something wrong with me. So the earlier we can do something, the better. You don't have to have a label, so let's just say you don't know that it's dyslexia, but you suspect it might be. We can often do something as if it is something that is, addressing it as if is often good enough, and we don't have to spend over $1,000 getting a formal assessment in order to actually do what we need to do start seeing results and start seeing some turnaround. So if you didn't start early and you aren't intervening on the early end, don't beat yourself up over it. I can see it I can't see it in your eyes right now, but when I'm at a booth talking with a homeschool mom, I can just see them starting to do that, of beating themselves up over, I knew I should have done something sooner. I knew I should have done something different. You did the best you could with the resources you had and what you knew at the time. So cut yourself some slack. Yes, early intervention is best, but it's better late than never, and there's not really a too late. So I put the mistake of too late in there because Grace's mom, Paula, said, and I probably waited just a little bit too long. I probably should have done something a little bit more, a little bit sooner, and not kept just backing away when it was too hard. And so that was like her piece of advice of just, I probably waited a little too long. Maybe address it sooner. Again, it's not too late as long as but the sooner we get something going, the sooner we have the kid not shutting down on us, which is what we really want to make sure doesn't happen. And then the fourth mistake is it's just too much the same. And often when we're first coming home from a public school situation, or even if we're just getting started homeschooling from the beginning, that we try to create school at home, traditional school style, because it's the way we were taught. Feels comfortable, pretty familiar, and we kind of just assume that that's how school needs to be. But my guess is you aren't bringing your kids home to homeschool because school was working, traditional school was working as is. You're bringing them home because something wasn't working. When we try to recreate school at home, we're recreating more of the same that wasn't working. In school, there's a lot of drill and kill, workbooks, flashcards, tests. It's just too boring. And frankly, a lot of what we try to do in homeschool is the same thing. It's some variation on a workbook, flashcard, test. I don't know if any of you have dyslexic kiddos, but dyslexic kids don't learn well by just spitting back facts. They really need to understand things. They need to be engaged with it. They need to connect with it. They're great at making connections, but they need to be able to make those connections. And just drilling it often doesn't cut it. Grace's mom said, Paula said, I would try doing little, put things on little word cards or something and, play a little game with it. She almost like she could see through it. I mean, she was making a good effort to try to liven it up. She was like she realized that mom was just trying to quiz me on words again. She wasn't having any of it. So a little bit more of the two same. If the child isn't learning the way we're teaching, we need to shift gears and teach the way they learn. Or we're either thinking it to ourselves, we all thought it. We've either thought it or we're actually finding ourselves saying it out loud in our exasperation that, I've explained it 6 different times. I'm not sure why they didn't get it. Often, we're explaining it in the same way again, over and over. And if they didn't get it after the second time, we need to find a different way to come at it, because what we're trying to do, the way we're trying to come at it, is not working. Especially if we're using a lot of words, a lot of talk. We're trying to expect them to remember steps and just mimic steps. Many of our struggling kids don't tend to learn that well that way. We need to find alternate ways that get at the meaning, get at the understanding. I say wrong key here. This is from Carol Barnier, she's got a book, Getting Your Child Off the Refrigerator and Into Learning. And she talks about learning being a door we're trying to open. Our job as the adult is to help them find the right key to help unlock that door. Now the kid's job is to actually try turning the knob once we put the key in the lock, to try and work with us. And we don't want them to be, so they need to know that but if we talk about it being, just that analogy of a key in a door, trying to find it, if the student can say, wrong key, Mom, it's not an indictment against themselves as a learner. It's not, I'm too stupid, I couldn't get this. If they can just say, wrong key, we need to try a different way, and you don't get offended by that, and you're okay with that, it's a huge difference and shift for the child's perception if they can just say, this approach isn't right for me. If we share that analogy of a key and a door to unlock things, and we let them know that their job is to let us know that this key isn't working, and our job is to try to find an alternate approach, it goes a long ways towards preserving their self-esteem as a learner. Much of what we've tried to do is too much the same.